Uh, Good afternoon, everyone. This is Ron Bargel, and this is the second um, presentation of the Pittcon virtual off-season program.
Keeps coming up saying it can't
Our
find
June speaker is Dr. Damià Barceló. Damià is a professor at environmental chemistry in the chemistry and physics department at the University of Almeria, which I found out is in Spain. Damià has been attending Pittcon for many years, and Damià is going to give us a talk on the microplastics. And I was just telling Damià earlier, I've been working in municipal water treatment for over 30 years, and it just seems as though every so often we get a hot topic, and of course everyone remembers PFAS, and that was the hot topic a few years ago. Well, microplastics is now the new hot topic, and this is what Damià is going to give us a talk on, so we should be a little more educated on microplastics.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to talk about microplastics. And this presentation, as soon as we can get it online, is about microplastics in the environment, not only in the water system, because there have been a lot of talks or, let's say, research and presentations on water, is also about terrestrial environment. So in summary, the outline, which is indicated in the first slide, on the second one, as soon as we can get it in the screen, is about microplastics in general, introduction in terrestrial environment, also in what is the situation in different agroecosystems. Then microplastics in as a litter in the rivers, in the sea. Later we will discuss the analytical techniques, the methods, the green and non-green methods, let's say. Now, as you know, many analytical techniques, they go more to the green, but the questions also related to the analysis of microplastics are quite difficult nowadays because there is not a unique analytical method in place. Then a third block will be about the sorption of this. Okay, this is the presentation. And then the sorption of the microplastics. Can I get the second slide, please? Or I can do it, or you can do it. Okay, thank you. This is the outline that I was talking about. So we talk about the sorption. The third block will be of the sorption of contaminants. So microplastics are a kind of passive samplers because they can absorb, or they are able to absorb many chemicals, including pharmaceuticals. So that also metals and also pathogens, by the way. So we were discussing briefly before that, for instance, there were cases in the case of the COVID or viruses or bacteria that were transported through microplastics from one country to another. Then another block will be bioaccumulation and toxicity to biota, especially, and to biota related to soil and related to water. Also, the question of the new plastics, bioplastics, and finally the remediation technologies, like what can we do to eliminate microplastics? What are the techniques? And finally, the health effects, if there are any, because there is a big discussion that not many of the microplastics are really producing at this moment effects in the humans, at least demonstrated effects, because we know that they are there. We know that we are breathing, especially in big towns, in mega cities like for instance Shanghai or Paris. Only the really big cities, because in the big cities they have a lot of problems with the laundry, with the fibers, with also cars, automobiles, rubber. So there is many different aspects. So can I get the next slide? But I don't see now in my screen. I don't know if it's there. Can we see the start?
Yeah, for some reason, the slide.
John's working on it. Hang on one minute there.
we can get the third slide. Okay, yeah, next one. Now here more details about the soil and terrestrial environment. There is quite a lot of the amount of microplastics in the soil, in the agricultural soils. It is shown, or it has been reported that up to 6.6 million tons, much more than in the ocean, and according to many scientists and many reports. Also, the countries which are really have more soil polluted are India, China, the US after China and India. Of course, China and India are much more populated than America. Also, the countries like in my country, Spain or California or Israel, which are irrigating wastewater with treated wastewater, so that wastewater contains microplastics, and that can also be sorbed or can be deposited in the soil. So if we do wastewater treatment and irrigation, there's chances to get more microplastics into the soil are higher. Sources of microplastics are wastewater irrigation, sewage sludge, mulching systems in agricultural. For instance, I will show some reports from China. Airborne microplastics also in soils and plants. So we have different ways to get microplastics in the agroecosystems. Also in soils in agricultural and farmlands, they have been extensive reports in China that many soils are polluted up to amounts which are unbelievable, and average amounts are between 2,000 and 3,000 items per kilo, microplastic particles per kilo. But in some cases, only very few cases, they could even reach 40,000, which is a tremendous amount per kilo of. Also, microplastics are in farming, organic farming present, and also, of course, in less amount in urban soils, because urban soils they should not contain microplastics. If I can have the next slide, the next PowerPoint. So here is the paper that was published in ESNT about the Chinese cities, which all of them contained Chinese soil, 477 along China, which were polluted up to 4,000 items per kilo. Can I get the next? Can I have the next one as well? The next presentation. So this is China, which I have been working in Hangzhou Bay in China, and you can see how it looks like the Chinese soils, the plastics. They are using huge, incredible amounts, and that also, of course, contributes to the mulching and irrigation, which contributes to changes in the soil bacterial activity and could affect the crop production. This is the main worry, in China. Chinese politicians and Chinese leaders, the main worry is to feed the people. They need to feed 1.4 billion people every day, and that's not easy. So if your soil is getting spoiled, then you will have problems with that. Can I have the next one? The next slide corresponds to a recent paper done in India with colleagues from India, where we look at a lake and groundwaters in a contaminated site, and we found that no, sorry, this is not in India. This is in China still. This is the organic farming paper, which reports values of microplastics in organic farming, used for different parts of China. This is in Chinese paper done with the people in Chiang City. Can I have the next one? The next one is in Saudi Arabia, where we also look at soils in Riyadh. And this area, Saudi Arabia has no water. Only the water that they use is treated wastewater. This treated wastewater is used in the different parts of Saudi Arabia for irrigating and for crop production, and also for irrigating the wild plants. And we also detect the microplastics in soil. Can I have the next one? The next one is the one that I mentioned to you. This is the one related to microplastics in sediments in India. This is a recent paper that we did some colleagues in India, and in this case you can see the red spots, which were close to a landfill site. And in this place, the number of particles per liter were up to 40 to 90 microplastics per liter in this site in India. So that means that depending on the site, the number of microplastics in the water or in the sediment will be higher or lower. In this particular case, it's around this number. This number is also it fits very well also with data from China that recently also in landfills they also detected around the same amount, around 90 particles per liter in water close to a landfill in China. Can I have the next one? The next slide relates to the ocean, problems in the ocean, which are well known. The amount of plastic usage is increasing from 160 to 1.2 million tons. Different amounts of components, PET, different components of polymers. The microplastic, we talk about microplastic, but each microplastic is different. The polymers are different. So basically, the one of the main sources is the wastewater treatment plants. It's calculated that 1 to 10.15 microplastic particles per year. Fibers are important. I mean, different types of materials. Polyester, of course, the washing load, which is very important, that gives around 6 million particles or fibers. Recently, we performed a study in Europe about the rivers flowing to the Mediterranean, not to the Mediterranean, to other European rivers. So we make an estimation, not an estimation, but a real measure. We measure it in on site of the number of microplastic or plastic litter that was going from the rivers to the sea. These were, well, in total, it's calculated that 1,000 rivers account for 80% of the global plastic. This is in globally in the world. In European input, we calculated by numbers that was a work that was carried out 3 years ago and coordinated by the European Union in ISPRA. That was around 5,000 tons per year, which is the input of microplastics going to the sea. Another interesting paper that was recently published, that was in the Netherlands, by the way, because they had flooding events. Each when there is a flooding event, the number of microplastic particles is increasing by 100. So this has been reported, and it's demonstrated that usually when there is a flooding event, of course, when there is a flooding event, we also get more contaminants from other types. For instance, persistent pollutants, PHs, and things like that, which are trapped into the cement, they will also increase. So we calculate that between 5.25 trillion plastic particles are floating in the ocean, and that's increasing. That's increasing every year because we are still using too much single-use plastic. That's a problem because we don't use bioplastics. In Europe, the European Union Framework Directive, the marine water, they want to reduce plastic by the year 2030 by 50%, but that's, of course, it will take still some time. Can I have the next one? The next slide shows one of the most important disasters that happened during COVID. That was a vessel close to the Sri Lanka coast in India that dumped huge amounts of microplastics and fibers into the ocean. This was burning this vessel, and that was a big disaster. But of course, we were under COVID, and many people, it was not too much on the news. This was a real disaster, and still we are suffering from that. Can I have the next one? So they have been in the sea. But the question of microplastics, it is relatively not new. We talked today about microplastics, but here I wanted to show you that one of the first papers that published data on microplastics was from 1973. What happened is that at that time, in the early 70s, when it was detected the problem, there were several papers. This is in Marine Pollution Bulletin, but also in Science. People they did not give the importance as we gave today. So then more or less the topic was sleeping during many years till the year 2000 when it really was a revival. So some of the topics that we are today discussing or some research that we are doing, we should be more careful because, we knew that the problem existed already many years ago, but we did not do much during quite a lot of years. So during 20 years, we did not work too much on the topic. Can I have the next one? The next one is the paper that relates recent paper on the data in Europe, which they were collected between 307 and 925 million liter items in released in Europe from Europe to the ocean. These are the dots with the different sampling sites going from Spain, the Netherlands, or Germany, or the South, Italy, Greece. So there were many laboratories involved, and everything was coordinated by ISPRA. Can I have the next one? The next slide shows also the rivers. So the red color, which is the Danube, the Vistula, the most polluted rivers with microplastic items, and the ones, the green or the blue, are the cleanest ones. So that makes the list of European rivers which are affected by the floating of microplastic. And can I have the next slide? In the next slide shows the situation which I mentioned to you earlier about the flooding events, when there is extreme flooding events. And in this graph, you can see when there is a flooding event, there is a huge increase on microplastic levels in the graphs, and that was reported in the Netherlands. When there is extreme floodings, we should be careful, because not only microplastics, also pollutants like PHs or PCBs, and also, by the way, pathogens. So pathogens is also a big problem, because when there is a flooding event, pathogens will be there as well in huge amounts. So better than do anything during few days with this water. If I can have the next slide. In the next one shows also the seasonal variation of, this is a recent paper done in Italy with colleagues in Italy, that seasonal variation on the microplastic composition in the right side, and also the graphs shows that the different peaks of microplastics that's in the riverine waters in Italy. And that shows also that it changes the composition of the polymers, because the different plastics, polyethylene, polypropylene, they may change the uses and also the degradation during the seasons. So we have winter, summer, the composition, the chemical or the polymeric composition is not the same. So it may change during the season. So the situation with the plastic material or microplastics is quite complex, because we have different materials. It changes during the seasons, and flooding events increasing. So there are quite a lot of things to be answered. Now we go to the second part of the talk, which is more the analytical part. The analytical part. Can I have the next slide? The question to measure microplastics is quite complex. So basically, we have different methodologies. We like scanning microscopy with visual inspection, but then we have three main techniques to measure the composition of the microplastics, because we want to know what kind of first, we want to know the size, the color. We can see the color by visual inspection, but then we also want to know the polymeric composition. Polymeric composition, we can only know it by three main techniques: FTIR, Raman, micro-Raman, and pyrology GCMS. These are the three main techniques, which are different. And that makes that still today we don't have a unique technique. Many labs, or most of the labs, they are using FTIR at this moment. But the comparison of the data is getting difficult, is getting complex. The other issue is this particle size. Now the instruments, we can go very low in low micrometer size. We can go a few micrometers. So that's good, because we can really measure very small particle. But still the problem, you will see it later in one of the slides, that is quite complex. Can I have the next one? This is how it looks. The samples collected in Saudi Arabia of the different microplastic particles. The sizes are different. Everything is a little bit different in each picture. It also shows that the graph below shows that if we compare the data of microplastics between two big cities, well, one is big city, which is Riyadh, is 8 million people, and the other one is a second city in Amman, in Saudi Arabia. So in big cities, the risk of microplastics in the water is much higher, because much more population, much more use of plastic. So the huge amounts corresponds always to the big cities. So many microplastics problems are associated with the big towns. Can I have the next slide? The next slide, you can see how it looks. This is Saudi Arabia. I put this example because it's a special country. I mean, in this country, there are no rivers, although we call it Riyadh River. This is the wastewater treatment plant, and they call it Riyadh River because there are no rivers in Saudi Arabia, if you are aware. So the big treatment plant gives a flow like a river, and this is used for irrigation of crops, and also irrigating gardens and wild plants. And this is how we do the sampling of microplastics with these nets, plankton nets, and with different canals. Can I have the next slide? Can I have Yeah, when another thing when you do the sampling is to know the composition. Chemical composition is very important, and here we can see that the chemical composition, polystyrene, polypropylene, PET. So you need to have a good instrument to measure the composition, because the polymer composition will determine also the toxicity and different effects of microplastics. In the next one, this is one of the techniques, the FTIR. The next one, you will see an example using the next slide, please, is the GCMS, a GCMS method that was developed here in Spain, and we're using also looking for the plastic materials, pyrology GCMS. So you burn the sample at high temperature, and then you look at different type of microplastics. We look at different standards here: nylon, polycarbonate, polystyrene, polypropylene. So if I can have the next slide. I can in this method you need to have a very good system of library and calibration curves. So here is one of the examples of the different standards in the library. How can you compare the standards is quite complex. You need to have this method available. Usually now the instruments they have already in place, so you can compare your spectra. But anyway, you need to be careful as well with the comparison of the different spectra and the different matrix. And in the next one, you can see some of the results reported in beaches. In the next slide, please, is some of the results reported in beaches, polystyrene, polypropylene, and polyethylene. So these are some data from the beaches which were reported in this paper, which using pyrology GCMS. But now the question, and I can have the next slide, which I will be a little bit more with more attention. This is an interesting paper that was performed in Europe, interlaboratory study with 34 laboratories, expert laboratories, and they were comparing only a standard sample, not real samples. So that was the polymer itself, pure polymer. So they were polyethylene, polystyrene, polypropylene, PET. And in the left side, you can see the techniques, FTIR, most of the labs, they were using FTIR. Only a few labs were using Raman, micro Raman, one lab, and pyrology GCMS, 2 labs. So if you see the table, the green color means there was an agreement, and no green means no agreement. So basically, you can see that there is only one lab using micro Raman who did well in all the samples, but in all the other samples, there are problems. So there are problems. There is also the labs were able to identify polystyrene with no problem with the technique. But if you look at all the other standards, like low density polyethylene or polystyrene, polypropylene, not all the labs were able to identify the sample. So that's, for me, is worried because this is only the qualitative information. So can you imagine that they are using techniques, very sophisticated techniques, to identify a polymer, which is a standard, and they are missing the identification? And that's the question. That also gives to us the message that we need to organize more harmonization methods, and we need to do more work in this direction to harmonize and to compare data, because at this moment it's very difficult if you use FTIR or Raman or pyrolysis to compare your data in most of the cases, because this is only standards. I mentioned to you, no sampling, no sample treatment. It's just the standard sample. Can I have the next one? The next one is the what is recommendations. The recommendation should be, of course, harmonized as interstudy, more interlaboratory studies to look at the limit of detection, and to look really to perform well these techniques, FTIR, Raman, and pyrology GCMS, to be able to compare the data. So we should be able to understand, because you know, now in the literature, there are so many papers dealing with microplastics that if we want to compare data from Europe, US, and China, it's very difficult. It's very difficult because everybody is using different methods. And we have seen in this interlab that real samples will be even more difficult than standard samples. So I think this is something that needs to be done. I know it's in progress, but we need to work more on this direction. If I can have the next one, the next slide refers to the so-called green methods. Green methods is a way to estimate how much green is your method. So you put all your data in a computer site, and you use different methodologies. Like, for instance, in this case, we have the agree metric score. In the green metric score, they are comparing 4 methods for microplastics: in situ visualization and selective sampling, FTIR, chemical digestion, pyrolysis, GCMS, and solvent extraction, and FTIR and density separation. If we see the numbers, usually green methods means that as much more green, the number is higher, so 0.88 will be the best. But if I select this method for microplastics, there is a problem here, because in situ visualization means that I can see the microplastics, but I cannot see what is the composition. So I'm not interested. So because, if I cannot see the composition, what can I do? What can I say about this microplastic? Then the second one, which is best, is 0.453. In this case, if I use FTIR, I have 0.53, and then I know that what kind of plastic is there, microplastic. So then, in this case, when you have a green method, you always will need to make a compromise, and probably in this case, the best method will be the FTIR. Pyrolysis GCMS is the worst because, in eco-friendly technologies or in green methods, when you use energy, pyrolysis GCMS needs energy. So then in that case, you have a penalty, and the penalty is that the number is lower. So this is something that is a message that green methods are important, but we will need to find a compromise between what is green and what is the information that we want to get from the sample. Can I have the next one? The next block is already now the adsorption with microplastics and other materials, for instance, pharmaceuticals. We know that there is huge interactions. Well, there are different types of interactions. Here you can have examples of the different types of interaction, adsorption, different types of examples on tetracycline, adsorption, desorption, and different types of bonding. So there is quite complex situation because the microplastics can also be aged or not. And also depending on the molecule, sulfametoxazole, each molecule will behave different. So the interaction of microplastics with pharmaceuticals or with any other molecule will be quite complex because each molecule is different, and the bondings and the interactions will be as well different. Can I have the next one? In the next slide, we can see the interactions with microplastics with antibiotics, which are very important because, many microplastics in the soil, especially, and in the water, antibiotics are being used in huge amounts everywhere, not only for humans, also for farming. And then microplastics and antibiotics are generally associated in many samples. So this is data from the world, over the world. This was done also by Chinese people, but the data shows that microplastics and antibiotics were associated in many of the samples, and the toxicity and the absorption were also associated. So be careful, because usually microplastics are not detected alone by themselves. There is also something else, and antibiotics have a good chance to be there. Can I have the next one? In the next slide, we can see another problem which is related to soil and antibiotics in soil, is the absorption, the co-contamination of microplastics and antibiotics in soil. This is especially important for the crop production and for the interaction between crops and soil. And this is one type of work that we are doing in China. Can I have the next one, the next slide? That we compared with different co-exposure with sulfametoxazole, which is a very well-known antibiotic, in lettuce, how these absorb at different concentrations. And if I can have the next slide, because we don't have much time to finish. Here we can see that according to the concentration or the size, what is important here is to show the controls, which is the highest one. So there is to see the effects on the uptake and transpiration inhibition. So the control, of course, it gives you the good number, but then as soon as you have polypropylene microplastics at 20 microns or 200 microns, the sizes, or they will also be effects. So all the other ones are lower. So it means that there is a transpiration inhibition on the lettuce, because you irrigate the water, the soil, and then the lettuce will uptake this contaminant, and the contaminant with the inhibition and with the microplastic, so, and the polypropylene microplastic. So there is an inhibition, and that shows that we need to be careful with wastewater with containing microplastics, because for crop production, lettuce is a very important crop, as you know, a very important product. that is always being used as an example of the problem with water treatment and reuse, and this shows that the case of microplastics has an effect. Can I have the next one? So in the next slide shows, now we are approaching to the end, shows that the co-contamination and problems with edible plants, there have been already some reports that showing that we need to be careful with edible plant, soil, plant, crop. There is an absorption from the wastewater going irrigated into the soil, and the soil and the plant uptakes the microplastics. Is also another effect will be co-contamination, and negative effects can cause these mixtures, and the polypropylene reduces significantly the uptake of significantly sulfur methoxyethyl uptake and translocations in lettuce by inhibiting the transpiration. So I think these are effects which can produce the production, which can affect the production of lettuce. Can I have the next one? And of course, it will affect also other type of crops. Can I have the next slide, if possible? Yeah. And then toxicity. The other issue is the contamination is not only affecting the translocation in plants, but also toxicity to other organisms. And that will give you some examples on that. There have been already many reports in fishes, for instance, in terrestrial organisms. We also did perform with some colleagues controlled experiments, but there are many experiments reported in the literature about fish. Also, several fish basically bioaccumulation also has been reported. So this is well known. Also, we know that polypropylene and polyethylene and many of the polymers from the microplastics are present in deep sea fish, in high mountain lakes. So the fishes they accumulate microplastics everywhere. Practically now, if you catch a fish in any place, you will get some microplastics. So I always make this joke when you go to a restaurant that probably the fishes contains microplastics, among other things, of course. But anyway, this is very common. Can I have the next one? The next slide. In the next slide, you can see that, for instance, an example that we did some experiments here in Spain on the biofilm exposure with triclosan. It was a small effect on the triclosan. The red colors indicate this effect on the biofilm, because biofilm in the river is very important for the life in the rivers. So for the river ecosystem is very important. So there was an effect in the rivers. Can I have the next one? These are work. The next one is the work performed in Italy in lakes, in high mountain lakes, where also find polyethylene. Polyethylene is usually very common because it's the low density. Polyethylene can fly everywhere, and usually is one of the most detected microplastics everywhere. Polymer, because it's easy because it's the low density one and can go almost any place. And polypropylene as well. Can I have the next one? The next presentation. Also, these are mussels. Mytilus galoprovincialis mussels are also good indicators for the microplastic pollution. This is in the sea. Can I have the next one? Microplastics. And then we have what I mentioned to you, Mediterranean deep sea fish contains as well polyethylene and other polymers. So this is all reported by our colleagues in Italy. So can I have the next one? And the next one is quite interesting because it's an alternative to the conventional plastic, conventional single-use plastic, is the polylactic acid, which has been reported as one of the substitutes of conventional plastic. But some colleagues in Brazil, Malafaia, did experiments looking at the toxicity, and they also found that this new chemical or this new bioplastic is also toxic. Obviously, it's less toxic than the ones that use single-use plastic, but it still has some toxicity, as you can see here, inhibition of acetylcholinesterase and bioaccumulation. Can I have the next one? The next one also shows the pharmaceuticals and interaction of microplastics with pharmaceuticals in terrestrial organism. Also, inhibition on the root land and significantly increases the interaction between these in the seed germination, affecting the seed germination when you have this mixture of microplastics and pharmaceuticals in the soil or in the agroecosystems. Can I have the next one? The next one is a summary. The next one shows summary what we should do, or what are the things that we plan to do, or the society is already prepared to do. For instance, we are working on the polylactic acid, new materials, polypropylene, polycapropylene, and other materials which are here indicated, polyhydroxyalkanoates. Also, wheat gluten biopolymers, which will be used in substitution of single-use plastics, bioplastics. This is very important to go in this direction. Of course, at this moment are too expensive, but I'm sure they will succeed in the future. Elimination technologies we have, but they can be eliminated from water, membrane technologies, or remediation technologies, photocatalysis, or microbial technologies. Can I have the next one? In the next one, we can see still problems, challenges. Microplastics can also go through the plant leaves, through the air, airborne microplastics. We can also have, we detect those with some colleagues in the UK. They look at hemodialysis in hospitals. Hemodialysis patients, they get up to 600 liters of water, and so they need to be careful with this, because also in hospital care or in our daily life, we should be careful about that, because we know that microplastics are present in our body, and of course, as much as we can do, much better to avoid that. If I can have the next one, the problem with microplastics in the air and humans is mainly reported to the big cities. So if you are living in a small town, don't worry too much. But in big cities, Paris, Shanghai, London, Beijing, all the levels are pretty high. In fact, a colleague in Shanghai recently reported up to 400 microparticles per liter in the clouds. This has been published recently. So I think it's very important that we know that the big cities is a problem, or maybe a problem for the humans living there in mega cities like 10, 20 million people. Can I have the next one? We are almost getting to the end. So occurrence, analytical phase, general recommendations. I think that the general recommendations are that we should really improve our interlaboratory, our analytical methods, improve our harmonization to interlabs. We need methods, with reliable methods that we can compare our data. We need to have better green methods, establish international database to collect occurrence data. We need this, but with reliable data. And we still need to know answers like what is major threat, pollution to the environment is a major threat, compared to climate change. Is more important climate change or microplastics? Is a threat to biota, ecosystems, biodiversity, or to humans? We know that to the ecosystem is a threat. To the humans, it still needs to be shown, but still, I know researchers working on this direction. And of course, in the mega cities is a problem. And if I can have the next one. So there were now recent studies, for instance, this is a way to try to normalize or to standardize the method of microplastics in water. This is from Canada, which they pumped 1,500 liters of water in the river. They made a device which was normalized. Of course, this is a special device, because pumping so much amount of water, it's quite some work. But they were normalizing it according to ANASTM method for Canadian waters. Can I have now the next one, which is almost the last one, the slide? So in this one, I want to show you that what is the OECD document was released last year, which policy recommendations that we should really change or do better in this direction. We need to curb the production and demand. We need to implement reuse systems. We need to enhance waste collection, improvement and recycling. We need to do much more in recycling, municipal litter management as well. We need to strong collaboration at international level, because the microplastic is a global problem, and in developing countries this is still a big problem, more than in US or in Europe or in some parts of China. So we need to ensure adequate financing and also help to the waste treatment. And in this report, they mentioned that South Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, Middle East, and North Africa are probably the countries where they will be the situation much worse. And we need to do a better global management and a management of this, and we need to improve the situation in this case. So with this, I am ending this presentation. I'm able to take some questions, and I have a final slide with a conference that I'm organizing in Barcelona, which you are welcome to assist. Is in October. Is about mass spectrometry, but is also in a way related to microplastic analysis because you can also use mass spectrometry. And thank you very much for your attention. And I am able to take questions if we still have the Zoom connection. Thank you very much.
Wow.
Thanks, Damià. Yeah, we are still here. I wanted to say that if you did have a question, you could either type it in, or if you would like to speak, raise your hand. Go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, I just have a couple. I mean, it just floors me. I had no idea what type or how huge of an impact this microplastic is on the environment. It seems as though it's like way worse than I first anticipated. Now, I assume, like PFAS, a lot of these microplastics don't naturally degrade in the environment, correct? I mean,
Yeah, exactly. No, they don't degrade. They go smaller and smaller. But then the question is it could even be worse because the microplastics they are transformed in nanoplastics, and then toxicity of nanoplastics is still more complex. They say that many researchers they say is more toxic. So they take few years to degrade slowly to nanoplastics, but they don't degrade completely. No, it's like, and in addition to what you mentioned. Microplastics, they have already papers on that. The PFOS and PFOA and all these compounds, they can be sorbed into the microplastics. They are easily catched. They are easily like the Trojan effect, or they are sorbing. The PFOS and PFOA, they are very good for sorbing into the microplastic. In fact, there are many papers on this report on this. So the situation is even worse because you can have microplastics and PFOS and PFOA together at the same time.
yeah, and Damià, the other part of my question is, in the United States, a lot of the municipalities have plastic recycling programs when we throw out our garbage, but my understanding is there's only a few plastics that they can recycle. Is this correct?
Yeah, I think so. I think, only few plastics that you can recycle because the single-use plastic, you need to burn, you need to destroy it. Yeah, it's only few plastics. The question, I think, with plastics is that, my opinion, is that the authorities or the public opinion or the governments, they should help because we know how to produce better plastic. We know because there is I think in the Netherlands, I know there is a factory already making bio-waste plastic. We know how to do it, but the question is that if you buy a bottle of water for $1 or for $10, I think they should be some kind of subsidies or helping these companies to make plastic which is more affordable. No, I think if we don't go into this direction, we will still be using single-use plastic, which is terrible and will degrade many years. So I think they need to be some kind of incentive, to the people who is using new plastic. Another initiative that was in my country, I think, I don't know if in the US happens, but in my country, I know it happens. A couple of years ago, one of the big bank corporations, they are using credit cards with recycled plastic. So this is, at least we recover the plastic to make credit cards. Everybody has several credit cards. At least if this is done by, I don't give you the name of the bank because I'm not working for a corporation, but I know there is at least one that is doing this. So I think we should try to be a little bit inventive in this and try to use less plastic as we are using at this moment.
Excellent. Any other questions from anyone? If not, Damià,
Thank you.
I know you spread a lot of doom and gloom, but I mean, this is something that the general public definitely needs to know. I appreciate your work, and I see that there's a lot of work to be done on methods development here and sample prep.
Yes, of course. A lot of things to harmonize and to know what happens if you find now the to me worries is now if we find, I don't know, 50 particles per liter in the US or 50 particles per liter in Europe, what does it mean? What is the meaning of that? Because in addition, we indicate this by particles, but we don't give a concentration number because each particle is different, The situation is rather and I asked some of my colleagues working all the time with microplastics, can we convert in a way the particles per liter in concentration units, nanograms or grams? This is not easy, it's not easy. And then also the method, if the method is different, the numbers doesn't mean anything to me. maybe 10 particles here is more than 40 in China, you know. I don't know. It's because the nets are totally different, because if you use 50 micron nets or 300 micron net, if you use 50 microns, you will collect more plastic. You don't need to be a chemist to understand this, you know. So there are so many things which needs to be, let's say, made more understandable and more harmonized, that for me, it's still a lot of work for the young people to work in this direction and to really improve the situation.
Well, thank you, Damià.
Thanks to all of you.
Excellent presentation, and we look forward to seeing you at Pittcon.
Of course,
Boston.
in Boston next year. At least they were still 45 people in the audience. So no, or not. Oh, no, this is the number of slides. No, this is not the number of people. No, 15. Yeah, next year in Boston, of course. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Damià.
Thank you very much.